One of the few certainties in this life is that if you criticise the religion of special needs, you will be called a racist by people who know perfectly well that you're not, but who don't care. These people are called progressives. A progressive is what happens when a liberal goes bad. So bad, in fact, and so desperate are they to assume that you're a racist, that if they can't find any evidence of it, they will actually accuse you of disguising your racism by not talking about it. I wish I was joking. Believe me, I'm not. Now, personally, I can stand being called ugly names by people whose opinions I don't respect. But it must be hard for victims of genuine racism to see such an important word soiled and devalued like this. But that is the progressive way. We know this now. We've learned it the hard way. We know that progressives occupy the high moral ground where the end always justifies the means. And as they've shown us time and again, there is literally no limit to how low they're prepared to sink in asserting their lofty moral superiority. No lie is too great, no slur too egregious, and if not for double standards, they wouldn't have any standards. So when they throw the word racist at those of us who criticise Islam, we know there's no point in arguing with them about definitions because we know they're not remotely interested in whether the word is appropriate, only in whether it will stick and in how much damage it will do. You see, in progressive hands, the word racist has become the verbal equivalent of a chemical weapon or a dum-dum bullet, used spitefully, disproportionately, as a first resort and without the slightest justification. To summarise the progressive position without the juvenile insults, all religions have fundamentalists and all are equally reprehensible. Singling out Islam is the same as attacking all Muslims, and that's racist. Yes, I know that technically Islam is not a race, but I've chosen to believe that your views are driven by an underlying hatred of brown-skinned people, for which I have no evidence, but I sense it from your tone, which I find unhelpful and therefore racist in intent. So you are a racist and you ought to be arrested, la 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 la, or words to that effect. But you know, it seems to me that the people who constantly invoke skin colour for no reason, as progressives do, to the point of obsession, are the ones who actually have a problem with it. They see racism everywhere because they're riddled with it themselves. The patronising racism of lower expectations for non-white people is very progressive and has been allowed to permeate Western society like an insidious slime. You can't pick up a copy of the Guardian newspaper without getting it all over your fingers. And this kind of racism gives Islam a free pass by default, and with it the misogyny, homophobia and anti-Semitism explicitly endorsed by Islam, because, and only because, it's a religion followed mainly by brown-skinned people. It's the brown skin that makes all the difference. Progressives measure a person first and foremost by the colour of their skin, and it's the brown skin that gets Islam a free pass it doesn't deserve from racists. Contrast the way progressive racists treat Mormons, whose beliefs are equally batshit crazy. But they'll happily condemn and ridicule them in a way they wouldn't dream of doing to Muslims, and the reason is entirely to do with skin colour, as it usually is with genuine racists. You see, progressives don't really believe that non-white people are equal, or are capable of being equal on their own merits, but only in the way that a handicapped golfer is equal, artificially. They justify this racism in historical terms that no longer exist, thus condemning non-white people to carry around the values of the past forever and to always need compensating for the colour of their skin, which progressives regard as a kind of residual disability because they're racists. Traditional liberal guilt is something we're all familiar with, and even if we don't agree with it, we can sympathise, we can respect it as part and parcel of being civilised. But progressives have taken this to a whole new level, an almost religious level of toxic self-hatred, of ideological self-flagellation, a kind of original sin of being born into the first world, for which progressives can never forgive themselves or anyone else. To the progressive mentality, we are all imperialist oppressors in the West, whether we want to be or not, and everything wrong with the world is our fault by default. So when a bunch of hysterical Muslims throw a violent public tantrum because they've chosen to be offended by some ridiculous trifle, the default progressive racist response is to look around for any excuse not to hold them to account for their behaviour and to find somebody to blame and call a racist for provoking them. Progressive journalists are eager to explain away Islamic atrocities in political or economic terms while carefully ignoring the poisonous religious beliefs that actually drive them, because those poisonous beliefs make the brown people look bad, and that's terribly racist. An Islamic terrorist can stand in the street soaked in blood, quoting the Quran as justification, and progressives won't hear it because they've decided his real motivation is hostility to Western imperialism, which means we can take the blame again, thank goodness, otherwise we'd be racists. Patronising brown-skinned people in this way is what progressives are all about. It's the fundamental difference between a progressive and a genuine liberal. It's what turns the wine to vinegar. You know, I've always had time for genuine liberals because I can see that they're motivated by a sense of decency, so I can still respect them even when we disagree. But there's nothing liberal or decent about the progressive mentality, which has shown itself to be just so morally corrupt, malodorous and downright dishonourable that on the rare occasions I find myself agreeing with a progressive, it's like shaking hands with a leper. And it's more than apt that these wretched people have so thoroughly taken ownership of the word racist, what's left of it, because nobody but nobody wears it better. Peace and happy racism.